Season 1 is complete, but which episode did I love the most? Hello, this is Asha Media TV. My name is Asha, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel. This is where I like to watch and react and review a variety of stuff related to sci-fi, fantasy, and comic books. So in today's video, I am going to be ranking, yes, ranking all 22 episodes of the first season of Supernatural. But before I go any further, I gotta make sure that you know, just in case you tapped onto this video accidentally looking for non-spoiler info, this is a spoiler video. I am going to be talking about episodes from season 1 of Supernatural. So you have been warned, spoilers ahead. So I'm really excited to do this video because I just finished season 1. It was a mind-blowing experience. If you've been watching my reactions since episode 1 to episode 22, you know that it's been quite a roller coaster ride for me. I had a lot of fun watching some of the behind the scenes stuff like the gag reel and other videos. And I really love some of the comments some of you left, not only in my club, but also here on YouTube. But now I kind of want to take it one step further by sharing what I believe to be my top 22 episodes, starting from my least favorite to my number 1 favorite episode of the season. And just in case you missed out on watching my gag reel, go check out the video right now. It's somewhere here that I'm pointing, okay? Check it out and come back and watch this video. Now, before I get to talking about my ranking for the episodes of this season, I just want to kind of give you some ideas to the criteria or the factors that I'm including in my ranking, because if you're familiar with my channel here, you know that I watch a variety of different stuff, and some TV shows you can't rank the same way you would another type of TV show. So when it comes to Supernatural, in a nutshell, I'm going to rank these episodes based on which one entertained me the least to which one entertained me the most. That had 0% boredom for me from beginning to end. Now, for those of you that are familiar with my reactions, especially my club members, you know that there are certain elements and one particular person, not Dean, okay, who whenever they're in the episode, it automatically boosts my entertainment factor. So that's kind of a hint to let you know that there is at least a handful of episodes that's at the top of my list. But I think I might surprise you with my number 1. Or maybe not. We'll see. Okay, so I'm about to break down my ranking. I'm going to start at 22 and work my way all the way to number 1. But I need you to know that I'm not going to go into any in-depth analysis of the actual episode. I'm going to tell you the episode, the title, as well as some of the takeaways I had from the episode when I first watched it, and give you a general reason why it's at the spot that I've put it at. And that's it. Let's keep it simple, okay? All right, you ready? Let's go. At number 22, episode 17, Hell House. Now, for those of you that actually watched my reaction to this episode, this should not come as a surprise that it's the last on my list, because overall, even after a second viewing, while being in a better mood than I was the first time I watched it, I still stand by some of the stuff that I just didn't really like about the episode. Overall, it is the episode of this season that entertained me the least. I wasn't feeling the whole practical joking back and forth with Dean and Sam throughout the entire episode. Those two fake paranormal guys were literally funny for 5 seconds, and after a second viewing, I actually became more annoyed with them. So, I don't know. And above all, I found that the paranormal ghost, so to speak, or poltergeist, was actually not that appealing. It wasn't an entity or it wasn't a situation that really caught my attention. The only main positive takeaway that I get from episode 17, Hell House, is when Sam touches on the notion that things can manifest simply based on belief. And that in and of itself, as a philosophy to kind of talk about, especially related to the supernatural world, so to speak, or even quantum physics kind of thing, I found very interesting and definitely is the most memorable thing from that episode for me. At number 21, episode 10, Asylum. Overall, this episode is the one episode I felt had a lot of missed opportunities. I'm in the minority, it seems, when it comes to my personal dislike or annoyance with the side characters of teenagers in this episode. Many of you have given me your justification why you felt it worked. I still stand by the fact that I just thought it was a wasted opportunity. I would have preferred to see more backstory, perhaps flashbacks of the actual villain himself, because the villain, aka Mr. Zappy Fingers, I felt was a very interesting villain, especially someone that can literally just control your mind by touching you. I would have just preferred a lot more focus on that end so that we could have unfolded more of the tension and inner monologue going on from Sam's perspective towards Dean and from Dean's perspective towards Sam. That's just my personal preference. At number 20, episode 8. Bugs. Creepy crawlies. Supernatural creepy crawly bugs. Enough said. Next. At number 19, episode 7, Hookman. When it comes to this episode, it was a little hard for me because on one end, I felt that the storyline with the daughter of this preacher who is unconsciously acting out some kind of moral vengeance on people in her town, I thought that aspect of it was really cool. And then seeing Sam connect with her through mutual pain or mutual understanding of their situations, that part of the episode was cool. But what brings this episode at the spot that I've put it at here is the fact that the villain, or the Hookman himself, was a bit underwhelming for me. I felt the visual effects could have popped a little bit more, but regardless of that, I just did not find this villain menacing enough for me to be that scared. If anything scared me in that episode, if you watched my reaction, was just the sound effect and the jump scare moments. But when I finally saw the actual Hookman, I was kind of like, oh, okay. A dude with a hat in black and a hook. So, yeah. At number 18, episode 15, The Benders. Now, when it comes to this episode, I gotta give it credit where it's due. This is the first episode of the season to which we're introduced to monsters that are not actually monsters. In fact, they're human beings demonstrating monstrous behavior with a lot of cannibalism and some other possibly implied weird stuff going on with that family and the boys and the little girl and all that. Either way, for me, why I had to put this particular episode at the spot that it's at is because despite the monstrosity going on with that Benders-like family, I felt the pace just was a little bit too slow. I mean, by the time Sam goes missing and we have Dean, partnering up with that sheriff, from there on, I just felt the flow of it was a little bit choppy for me. And by the time Dean reaches the house, he gets in and he, has his altercation with the family and the little girl, and then finds Dean, and then Dean technically kind of saves himself in a way and ends up saving Dean. All that I felt was just slightly a little messy how they went about it. And so I can't really rank this episode any higher than at my 18th spot. At number 17, episode 5, Bloody Mary. Overall, Bloody Mary was a pretty decent episode. I would say the first 15 minutes was really scary and exciting, and I definitely loved the twist on the whole Bloody Mary lore. In this case, Bloody Mary was actually taking out personal vengeance rather than just simply being an entity that attacks you by simply saying Bloody Mary a millionth times in the mirror, right? So I did appreciate that. But when I had to compare the entertainment factors and certain elements of this episode versus the other episodes I'm going to mention, unfortunately, Bloody Mary takes its place at number 17. At number 16, episode 11, Scarecrow. There's no doubt that there was a lot going on in this episode, but the reason it's at my number 16 spot is mainly with one gripe that I had that I kind of went on a mini rant about. And although many of you, especially my club members, explained very clearly why that happened the way it did, I still don't like it. And that is that Sam made such a point to separate from Dean, go and find their father. It was the first time you'll see me really truly agree with Sam, because most of the time I don't. And I was all like, yeah, man, you do you. And I was actually excited to see perhaps, a separated path between these brothers so that I can get a feel as to how Dean operates solo versus how Sam operates solo, even just, temporarily, and see what happens. And so I was just so disappointed to see Sam make such a quick 180 the moment he felt that, Dean was in trouble. Now, thankfully he did, because he went and saved Dean. But at the same time, for me, what I just took issue with was the fact that he made such a stink about it. And even Demon Meg called him out, okay? Even though she had her ulterior motives for separating the brothers, but still. She was like, man, you just bitched about your brother this whole fucking time, and now you want to go back? So that's the main gripe I had with this episode, although so many awesome stuff were going on in there. For instance, as I just said, it was great to see Dean kind of do his thing solo, which gave me an idea how he was as a hunter before he went back to go and get Sam from school. And I really enjoyed the Scarecrow mythos and the sound effect. I thought the sound effect in this episode was just amazing. It was actually scary to listen to. You can hear the Scarecrow growling, and it was really, really freaky. And, of course, the introduction to Demon Meg. I mean, slitting a dude's throat in his car and then calling daddy through a bowl of blood, I think is quite memorable. At number 15, episode 2, Wendigo. Now, this episode almost made it a little higher up on my list, but again, when I had to compare how I felt about certain things in the episode and the entertainment value and all that stuff, it made its place at number 15. In this episode, there were at least two main things that I take away as really good positive stuff to remember. Number one being the practical and visual effects. For that time, in 2005 likely they shot that, and then it aired in 2006. Pretty darn good. In fact, I appreciated that the practical effects reminded me a lot of one of my top favorite supernatural type shows, which is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And the second aspect of this episode that I enjoyed was the suspense. This was the second episode I watched, and so the suspense build up from the disappearance of those people in the woods to finding some gory nastiness in the woods. And then you have the siblings, the sister and the little brother, little mini Solo was in the episode. But mainly what kept me entertained with this episode was more showing of the personality of Dean and the personality of Sam and their relationship and interaction as brothers. Because at this point in the episode, Sam's now back in the fold with this whole hunting lifestyle. And through his experience and their admission of who they are to the sister in the show, who's looking for her missing brother, I as a viewer find out about John's book. This book of all things supernatural that he's noted and left for his sons to use throughout their hunting of the supernatural stuff. I absolutely loved all that, and it definitely boosted my interest to watch more and more and more of Supernatural. At number 14, episode 13, Route 666. Now, if you watched my reaction to this episode, I was really worried for very good reason. Now, despite the heavy and loaded topic that's discussed in this episode, there are three main things that I definitely have to praise as noteworthy. So number one thing that I loved about this episode was the performance of the mom, Mrs. Robinson, performed by Kathleen Noon. Oh my goodness, this woman's monologue of what happened in her past brought me to tears. I was just so moved, and honestly, her performance was so good that at the mention of this episode, that's the first thing I think about. Now, many of you know I'm Dean for life, so the second thing that definitely stood out to me in this episode was seeing Dean get busy with his ex Cassie. Although I was a little bit jelly, I was very happy to see it was a beautiful woman, and it was nice to see Dean be a little bit vulnerable and watch Sam watch the whole thing kind of unfold, and he's all smirking and he's all like, I see you, boy, I see you. I really, really enjoyed that. And who can forget the crazy ending of this episode? And that's why for entertainment and shock value, it's at the point it is on my list. And that's the fact that Sam just like took a leap of faith, literally, and he's like, yeah, go there. And he wasn't even certain 100% that ghost truck was not going to kill Dean. Crazy. At number 13, episode 4, Phantom Traveler. Now, it's possible some of you may be surprised that I actually have this episode where it's at in comparison to the ones that are a little bit lower on the list. And the main reason for that is the entertainment factor. This was an episode that gave a lot of information, not only about what was going on in the story for the monster of the week thing or ghost of the week, but it also gave some more backstories. Like, for instance, we find out in this episode that there are people that are familiar with the work of the Winchester family. The guy at the airport, I forgot his name, but the dude who calls Sam, or was he called Sam or called Dean? I think he called Dean. And one or the other. Oh, no, his father, he got his father's voicemail. And then his father referred him to his sons. And so that was my first peek into, okay, it's not just these two people like doing this all on their own. There are others that they've helped, other clients, so to speak. And so there's a referral system, And I thought that was really neat. And of course, how could you not forget Dean freaking out because it's his first time going on a plane and he was so scared. So it's kind of obvious for a Dean lover to really enjoy watching all these moments that you get to see Dean not try to be cool all the time. And so I can't deny that definitely played into the entertainment factor for me. But believe it or not, the main thing from this episode that I remembered and noted was the fact that at the end, when they exorcised the demon out of the pilot on the plane, the demon looks at Sam and he's like, we know about your girlfriend. And in my reaction, I talked about how that was my first suspicion that these demons kind of have this network, right? This DNS, as I called it, demon network system, where they're all aware about what's going on. Now, in the episode, Dean pretty much kind of passes it off as the demon reading Sam's mind, so to speak, and not really fully being aware of things. But I don't think that's the case. And of course, by the end of the season, I realized I was right. There is a demon network system. At number 12, episode 12, Faith. Now, I swear I did not pick this episode to be at the 12th spot because it's the 12th episode. It just literally fell into place that way. So I was like, oh, well, it's meant to be. So in this episode, I definitely had a lot of stuff that I love. But of course, if you watch my reaction, you know I was super excited when I saw Julie Benz. I'm a huge Julie Benz fan. I love Buffy and Angel and all that. So that definitely played a factor in me choosing this particular episode at this spot. But, of course, there are other main takeaways that I talked about with this episode, and that is the fact that this is the first episode to introduce to me a different understanding of the Grim Reaper. I find that in this episode that there are multiple types of Reapers, which I thought was really, really cool, and this particular Reaper was quite scary. And then we have, of course, the whole thing of Dean about to die, and Sam taking literally a leap of faith, and Dean taking a leap of faith as well at the end, and that sad but bittersweet moment between him and Julie Benz's character. I forgot her name already, but that was really, really, really touching. And it was actually nice that one of you in the comment section validated my suspicion that this was the first time we really see a formal type of witchcraft in the series at that point. All right, so we are now at the halfway mark, and if you are taking notes, I'm sure some of you are already narrowing down at least my top 5. It should be really obvious. All you gotta do is look for a common denominator. I gave you the clue at the beginning of the video, and then you'll know likely what my top 5 likely will be. But let's now move on to my pick for number 11, which is episode 19, Provenance. I absolutely loved this episode. In fact, if it wasn't for the common denominator, as I've mentioned before, for my top ranking episodes, I likely would have put this episode a little bit higher, because this is one of those episodes where The story narrative was cool and was interesting. You know, this painting kind of coming to life and with a homicidal child in there that we thought it was actually the dad and all that. That was cool. But I had the most fun with what was going on around that. If you watched my episode, I was like Dean. I was egging Sam, you know, get with this girl, go on a date, you know, get laid. You need to get rid of that tension that's all pent up. I totally had a blast just going along with that. And so for me, it was not only entertaining, but it is one of the only episodes to which you'll see me get so engaged with the personal life of, you know, Dean and especially Sam. At my number 10 spot, episode 6, Skin. There's only two main things to really say about this episode and why it's really there at number 10. Number 1, it is the goriest, nastiest episode in terms of practical effects. Like, when I saw the dripping, gooey version of the skin of the skinwalker, I literally wanted to hurl. It was so gross that it was so wonderful. And the second factor, of course, that definitely lands this episode at my number 10 spot is Skinwalker Dean and the ultimate fight he has with Sam, and then he dies morphed as Dean's body, which led me to suspect that that's going to come around and bite Dean in the butt. And it was nice to see that it eventually does come back around to him in the Benders episode. So, you know, that was gratifying for me, especially since I always get most things wrong. At number 9, episode 3, Dead in the Water. Now, this could possibly also be another episode to which many of you are going to be really surprised by, but I really enjoyed this episode. In fact, I actually went back and watched it 2 more times because, number 1, I love Amy Acker and she's in it, and I had a blast watching her. As I've said before a million times, I'm a huge Buffy and Angel fan, so any cast member that ended up on this show, I'm going to be loving it a lot, a lot, a lot. But really, overall, this is an episode with a really great mystery and suspense and thriller and actual horror as well, especially the way the brother dies. You know, he pretty much gets drowned in his own sink. And also the ghoul in the water. That's a scary motherfucking looking ghoul. And if you've watched my review, because I did not have a reaction video for it, because at that time I was going through some copyright nonsense with YouTube. I didn't know what my options are, blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, in my review, I give somewhat of a picture collage of my impressions of the episode. And when I went to go back and watch it again, I realized that this is such a great episode from beginning to end because it really does deliver on supernatural aspects of stuff, a mystery, a tiny hint at romance and flirting, especially with Dean. I mean, that whole thing when Dean's like, oh, I love kids. And then Sam's like, yeah, really? How many kids do you know? And Dean's like, I still love that so much. And of course, seeing Dean connect with the little kid, there's just so much wonderful stuff going on in this episode. And so I had to definitely put it as part of my top 10 and express my love for it. At number 8, episode 16, Shadow. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was really tossing back and forth between this episode and the episode I put in my number 7 spot because they both had similar elements that kept me entertained and really like hooked into the episode, but one defining factor that made this episode reach my number 8 spot. So if you've been watching me for a while, you should know one of the main elements that I'm going to be repetitive on, and that's why they've made it into my top 10, is Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Now, there's a lot going on in this episode, but the main things that really stood out to me, and that's why it's at this spot, was the return of Meg. Because the first time we see her in the Scarecrow episode, she is just some regular girl, and then she slits some dude's throat in a car and starts talking to her father through poking her hand in blood. And so I thought she was some kind of crazy witch. And that by the time I reached this episode, I still actually thought she was somewhat of a sorceress, and she just has a affinity with demons and perhaps like she's a Satan worshiper. That's what I thought was going on. And of course, I found out later on that's not the case. But at this point now, the big return of Jeffrey Dean Morgan as John Winchester, him making up with Sam and the hug and the fight at the end, Now, the reason this episode made it to number 8 and not any further in my list is because I did have some gripes with the way it ended and the justification behind John's decision to keep himself separate from his sons and Dean agreeing to it. Oh, I don't want to go on a tangent about it again. So if you want to find out what I was ranting about, just go watch my reaction to this episode. But either way, for all the factors I just mentioned, it is at my number 8 spot. Which now leads me to number 7, and that is episode 20, Dead Man's Blood. I'm going to keep it really simple with this episode as to why it's at my number 7 spot, and what separates it from being any higher up or any lower down. And that is the introduction to vampires and a whole different lore behind them. In my reaction, I was really surprised because I'm a huge fan of who I consider to be the queen author behind the pop culture of vampires, and that is Anne Rice. And so I've read all her books related to the Vampire Chronicles and everything, and I've watched many types of movies. I've read other types of fiction, horror books related with vampires, and this was my first time watching a show that portrayed vampires very differently from what I'm used to. So I had to give it kudos for that, and that's why it's at my number 7 spot. And of course, if it's not obvious what the next factor is in this episode that I thoroughly enjoyed, it is of course again Jeffrey Dean Morgan, JDM. And watching him go on the hunt with his sons. Now the back and forth exchange between Sam and Dean gets really intense. And there's a moment in there between the two that is so heartbreaking, but also so amazing to watch. And that's why JDM is a common denominator for the next few episodes I'm going to mention right now. At number 6, episode 18, Something Wicked. I love this episode so much. Not only did I get a wonderful treat of flashbacks with Sam and Dean as kids, but we also, of course, get the common denominator of JDM. You catching on, huh? You're catching on. Okay. But to give credit where it is due for this episode, there was a lot of awesome stuff going on. Starting with a cool take on the Striga monster. I had mentioned in my reaction video that I'm familiar with the Striga monster from a different TV show, The Witcher. And so in this series, it was interesting to see a completely different take on the lore of this creature. And also this episode brilliantly subverted my expectations as to who the Striga was. That scene when Sam and Dean go to the hospital and they suspect this gnarly looking old woman to be the Striga, that was the first time I literally screamed out loud of like, ah! When Dean almost accidentally shot her and we find out it wasn't her and Dean was freaked out and everybody was freaked out and I was freaked out. But it was definitely so well done that I enjoyed the freak out, really. And as for the flashbacks, that definitely gave me more insight as a viewer about Dean's mindset and what made him feel this need to constantly please his father. And that is because there was what I was calling some guilt transference from Daddy's part to Dean, hence why Dean is the way he is. And although all that is so kind of messed up in and of itself, what I found interesting was actually a lot of your comments here on YouTube as well in my club, where some of you were quite vocal that you felt that John was likely using the kids as bait. And a number of you made some really great arguments that I'm definitely not going to dispute. All I know is I enjoyed the flashbacks, I love seeing JDM, and it was a cool story. And the jury's kind of out as to whether or not John intentionally used the kids as bait. I don't know. Let me know. Did he? At number 5, episode 9, Home. Alright, so this was the make or break episode for my journey with the Supernatural series. If you watched my reaction, I had gripes with one particular moment, and I was like, if it gets any worse, I don't think I'll be watching any more episodes. I'm not going to dive too much into that. If you want to find out what my thoughts were, you got to go watch my reaction. All right. But the main things that lands this episode at my number 5 spot. Number 1, Loretta Devine. Okay. Loretta Devine, huge fan. I love her in anything and everything. I don't care how bad the movie is. I love Loretta Devine. So her portrayal as Missouri was absolutely just so much fun, especially when she's like ragging on Dean half the time. Oh my God, that was so fun. And the second thing was Mama Winchester coming back from the dead, so to speak, or more or less as a ghost to protect her babies, especially Sam. That was so awesome. The reveal of her, because I love how they executed in showing that it was likely this really evil entity that's wanting to kill this family and hurt the family members, especially the baby. And then we see Sam get viciously attacked, and Mama Ghost reveals herself, and she does her ghost thing, and it was so nice to see. And Sam's face was just, amazing. But you all should know, right, by now, at this point in the video, what I really loved about this episode. JDM! Some of you might start getting sick of me saying it, but I'm gonna say it. This was the first appearance of JDM as John Winchester since the pilot. So of course, I was squealing with delight, but I was also just like, oh my goodness, what's going on with this mystery as to why he was there the whole time. And Missouri was like, Sam didn't detect your presence, which gave me as a viewer more insight about Sam's abilities and the mystery behind John's presence there. It was just gold. Just gold. At number 4, episode 21, Salvation. So with this episode, the first factor is very obvious, JDM. But second factor may not be so obvious, and that is Sam and his connection with the family that he saves from suffering the same fate he experienced, or him and his family experienced. And I really love how that was executed. It was brilliant. Having him connect to the mother on a one-to-one basis, also giving us some clues as to the type of babies that the yellow-eyed boss demon goes after. And that is in reference to infants that turn 6 months that have supernatural abilities. Now, of course, they don't outright say that in this particular episode, but I love the clue they gave you through the mother saying the line to Sam that her baby looks like she's reading her mind sometimes. And if you watch my reaction to that, I was like, oh my God, that's a clue. That's the type of kids that this boss demon goes after. And so I really loved how they executed that. And as I said in my review of this episode, I liked that there was a really good payoff in creating that connection with Sam and the mother, because when they go back to the house at the end to confront Boss Demon and thwart his plans from abducting the baby girl, Sam's connection that he made with the mother is what helps her trust him at the end and kind of fend off her husband, who's all like, leave my family alone, and going crazy on all that. That I thought was brilliantly done. Okay, people, so we have reached my top 3. If you're taking notes, you should already have noted down the 3 episodes. But can you guess what my number 1 is? Can you? All right, at my number 3 spot, episode 22, Devil's Trap. Ha! I bet some of you thought this was going to be my number 1 choice, but it is not. Although it has one of the common denominators, JDM, and a lot of great action, especially with yellow-eyed boss demon, which is the reason why this episode made it easily to my number 3 spot, because that whole roller coaster ride of, is John a demon? He's not a demon? Oh my gosh, that drove me bananas. It was so awesome. And the entertainment value was from the beginning to the end. It did not miss a beat. It was almost a perfect episode. What kind of ruined it for me was the ending. I hated the cliffhanger. It was just too much. Although many of you made it quite clear you enjoyed my reaction right at the end when I screamed like a crazy person when the truck impacted Dean's car. That was fucking scary as hell, and it really was like out of nowhere. And by that point, I was just so full of so much emotion. And another aspect of that episode that I definitely have to give praise to is now the explanation of demon possession. and then finding out that who I thought was more or less a witch or sorceress was actually a demon possessing the body of Meg, the human, innocent human. And Meg's death at the end was so, so sad. And even just the moments leading up to her exorcism with Dean making the decision that was not easy for him to make, and Sam feeling conflicted with the whole process. So much was going on that on a rewatch of my own reaction to the episode, there's a lot of praise that needs to go to the writers for how they did that episode. But despite all these amazing stuff that went on in this episode, especially as a finale episode, it still doesn't beat out the shock value I experienced for the next episode, and of course, my number 1 pick. At number 2, episode 1, Pilot. How could I not choose the first episode of this season? It's what hooked me in to keep on watching. But more than that, this is actually one of the best pilot episodes I've personally seen ever written. Because on my third watch, yes, I've gone back to watch it 2 more times, I noted the structure of the episode and just the way they started it with the Winchester family having that experience 22 years ago, and then bringing us to present day with Sam moving on to law school, starting a different life, but then being drawn back in by his brother, and he's still a little skeptical, and me as a new viewer getting to know this family under very tragic circumstances, and you're even more just like, oh gosh, what now? It's all these years later, and Dean's like the demon that killed their mother so viciously and so horrifically in the first few 10 minutes, not even 10 minutes, I guess 5 to 10 minutes of the episode. Already as a viewer, I'm just like, but that end, when his girlfriend gets flamed up on the fucking ceiling just like his mom. Genius. 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 I can't think of a better way to tell a viewer who's watching it for the first time, I think you're gonna like this show. Keep watching. Because that's what I've been doing, and here I am at the end of season 1. Friggin' pumped for season 2, and officially a fan of this series. But, it is not the most shocking thing that I experienced as a viewer. Hence, in my number 1 spot, episode 14, Nightmare. Did I surprise some of you with this choice? Maybe, maybe not. Let me know in the comments if I have. But I have to say it really was a difficult choice between this episode and the pilot episode, actually. Because as I just previously said, the pilot episode had all the elements to keep me watching further on and not disregard the series as something ridiculous. But this episode, I felt, gave the best payoff to connecting the dots and completely delivering such a shocking revelation that, as I said in my video reaction, and I will repeat right now as it stands, the shocking revelation of Max and his past with his mother dying the same way Sam's mother died was so mind-blowing that I literally almost had a breakdown if you watched my reaction. It was just crazy because it came truly, in a sense, out of nowhere. There was so much focus on him having telekinetic powers, which is another reason why this episode definitely hits the notes for entertainment factors, because it's one of my favorite powers to watch depicted on screen. And on top of that, we see the first full manifestation of Sam and his ability to foresee things to come. And we see him foresee Dean's death in the worst way, being shot to death by Max and his powers. And then we see Sam friggin' get telekinetic powers for 2 seconds. And we never see it again. But still, and having all that revealed to me as a new viewer that's loving and lapping up everything related to the series, and thinking the whole time this whole issue with the demon and the Winchesters was exclusively just their thing, and they just popped open Pandora's box and they're just like, no. It's a network of shit going on with these demons and whatever they're hunting with people like Max, like Sam, which is yet to be revealed to me at some point, hopefully in season 2. But everything I've just said about this episode is why I had to put it at my number 1, because I could not get that episode out of my mind. In fact, with that kind of revelation given to me as a viewer a little bit more than halfway through the season, I felt it prepared me well to now expect things to move up in terms of scale, to broaden out in terms of story narrative. And that, to me, is the sign of a fantastic series. And so that's why episode 14, Nightmare, easily makes it to my number 1 spot, because in my opinion, it had everything checked off except for a JDM, which I know many of you are really surprised about it. But that's how big of a deal it was, that JDM's absence did not deter me from saying, yep, episode 14 is number 1 in my books for the first season of Supernatural. So there you have it. That's my ranking. Let me know in the comments what your ranking is if you're so willing to take the time to let me know about it, because I really am curious. And if you enjoyed this video, the best way you can let me know is to follow a prompt you see there on the screen right over here. Just follow it. It's not gonna hurt. Just follow it. Thank you so much for watching. And in the meantime, check out in the description box my top 3 most viewed reactions related to Supernatural here on my YouTube channel. And stay tuned by clicking on the notification bell if you haven't already for my reaction to season 2, episode 1 of Supernatural, coming up very soon. I'm Asha, tuning out. Peace, everyone. Bye. Thanks for watching. Check out my other videos and subscribe. You know you wanna.